Good morning, Little Masters, and welcome to today's Tolkien Times. I'm the Man of the West, also from the Prancing Pony podcast. Thank you for joining me today for folks' favorite Fandom Friday. Now, every Friday, I get the chance to visit with somebody from the wider world of the Tolkien fandom. Writers, artists, musicians, craftsmen, scholars, content creators, and a whole lot more. Today, I'm pleased to introduce you to somebody who's helped open my eyes to many new discoveries in Tolkien's works. She's taught courses at Signum University, where she's the chair of the Language and Literature Department. She has more degrees than a hot day in the desert, serves on the editorial board of Malhorn, the Tolkien Society's annual academic journal, accepts my puns with some regularity, co-hosts the Rings of Power Wrap-Up podcast with me and James Tauber, and spent far too short a time with me last year on the Prancing Pony podcast as we covered the Houses of Healing. That short time is a mistake I intend on remedying this year as she joins me for 2 chapters and Tolkien Reading Day. Folks, please welcome to today's Tolkien Times, Dr. Sara Brown.
Oh, thanks for having me, Alan. It's lovely to be here.
It is truly lovely to have you with me. When you joined me last
despite
season,
your puns, I think we got on fairly well during PPP.
I think so. And those are just par for the course. There's not much I can do about them. They just come out. Sometimes they're
sometimes that's apparently your excuse.
All right, this is going to be a spicy interview. I can tell right now. I'm just going to tee you up with some good questions and let you run with it. When you joined me last season for the Houses of Healing on the PPP, we got to spend a little time talking about one of our mutual favorite characters in The Lord of the Rings, Éowyn. And in fact, your incredible insights on Éowyn are what led me to beg you to come back and cover the chapter, The Steward and the King, with me in March on the PPP. And it's Éowyn that I want to ask you about first. You gave a really fascinating talk at Oxenmoot this year. Éowyn it was, and Dernhelm also, that I would love to have you talk about. So sum up your 20-minute talk in a third of that time and help my listeners gain a deeper understanding of this amazing character.
No problem. I'd just like to very quickly point out that Alan didn't have to do a whole heck of a lot of begging. I'd have snapped his hand off straight away anyway. Come back?
Of course.
I know. Okay, so to summarize my 20-minute paper in 10 seconds then, what I was talking about with Éowyn was this balance of her personality as Éowyn and then the presentation of the character of Dernhelm. And a lot of what I've read about Dernhelm and Éowyn is that Dernhelm is a disguise that Éowyn takes on so that she can go into battle and so that she can fulfill her desire to ride as one of the Rohirrim. And that's absolutely a fair reading, because I don't think there's such a thing as a wrong reading along those lines. And I completely accept it. But I thought maybe there was another way of reading it. And that is because I do a lot of feminist criticism. Okay. And so I was reading Éowyn via some of these feminist critics like Judith Butler, Jack Halberstam, a few others. And reading through them, I saw, instead of Dernhelm being a disguise, I saw Dernhelm as being an intrinsic part of Éowyn. That's not to say that they're like a split personality. It's not that simplistic. It's about Dernhelm being the masculine side of Éowyn's femininity, and Éowyn being the feminine side of Dernhelm's masculinity. They are one and the same.
Yeah.
And what that does is it reads masculinity and femininity as not being rooted to a particular body, right, if you like. So in other words, and I've written about Shelob like this, Shelob, although always described with feminine pronouns, actually performs in a really masculine way. In the way in which she attacks and her power and all that kind of thing. So looking at that with Éowyn, what I wanted to explore a little more was the idea that in Éowyn, we have a person who has both a feminine and a masculine side, as many of us do.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that is not in itself incredibly unusual.
No.
Right? So if we read Éowyn as having both femininity and masculinity, that explains Dernhelm as being an expression of her masculinity. So that was what I wanted to explore a little further. And I thought that really Tolkien was making the case for me on a number of occasions, because whenever we have Éowyn, he uses feminine pronouns. Whenever we have Dernhelm, he always uses masculine pronouns.
That's right.
So I felt that Tolkien was kind of, laying it out for us a little bit there. And so if you then take that and you read the scene between Éowyn and the Witch King, that complicates that scene beautifully.
Oh, it does.
Because, of course, the Witch King is totally confused.
Yeah.
As far as he's concerned, no living man can kill him.
Right.
Well, that's great, except that he thinks he's seeing a man. He isn't. He's seeing a masculine projection of a person who is, in fact, also Éowyn. And so when Dernhelm laughs at him, and then Éowyn confronts him, well, the Witch King doesn't know what to do with that, right?
He is a little taken aback, it's true.
Yeah, and that's one of the problems, of course, that I pointed out in my Oxenmoot talk, is that the poor old Witch King was relying on this prediction that no living man can kill him, completely forgetting that not everybody is a man. Oops. Right? And by the time he realizes that, yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, prophecies are tricksy things, aren't they?
And he wasn't even remembering it verbatim either. I mean, Glorfindel's prophecy is not by the hand of man shall he fall, just a tiny bit different, but still very, man, right? I mean, that is the key element. But
exactly. Yeah. And I think he made some rather enormous assumptions there. Yeah. And having done that, of course, she brings his existence to an end. I don't know if we can actually say kill him, because I don't think he's killable, because he's not really destroyed, right? Yeah, he's not really alive, is he? So so really that's kind of it in a nutshell. It was just wanting to explore a different facet of Éowyn.
Fascinating.
That hasn't really been touched on. There are a number of scholars who have talked about Dernhelm and the way in which Éowyn uses Dernhelm to enable her to step outside of this cage, of course, that Gandalf himself describes. But I just thought there was a little further we could push it. Yeah. Rather than saying that Dernhelm is a disguise. And I'm never going to say, by the way, that scholars who read Dernhelm as a disguise are wrong, because they're not.
Right.
They've read... Yeah, exactly. Yeah. They've read Éowyn and Dernhelm in a very particular way, and that's all good. No problem there. I just wanted to take it in a slightly different direction. But that's the beauty of Tolkien, right? Yes. I mean, Tolkien's like an onion. There's so many layers, right? Pick a layer.
Oh, no, now I'm hearing the donkey from Shrek, but yeah.
Right.
No, you're absolutely right. And I just even come back to what Tolkien himself talked about, with his cordial dislike of allegory and how he much prefers history, real or feigned. And then he talks about applicability and how that lies in the reader. Well, that's exactly what you're doing right there. You're taking a look at that reading. You're not dismissing the readings of others who might still see it as just a mask that she removes, but instead, you're looking a little deeper and saying, well, you know what, I'm going to read this, more as this this expression. I like that, the idea of the masculine side of her feminine nature versus the feminine side of a masculine nature. I mean, because like you said, we all have a blend of those traits or characteristics, regardless of
well-rounded people do.
Yeah.
We all know that there are the toxic alpha bros on Twitter, right? Exactly. Who would deny the possibility of anything other than that. But I mean, let's take, for example, because I could argue for a very long time, but we haven't got a very long time.
I know this.
I could argue that Tolkien himself was very in favor of this idea of the blend of the feminine and the masculine. Yeah. Because those who hold just to the masculine fail.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at Boromir here for an example. Okay, doesn't make Boromir a bad person.
No,
it just means that
because then we're going to get into an argument about Boromir because his redemption is, that redemption arc is fantastic. But you're right.
Absolutely,
you're absolutely right in terms of the masculine traits being what lead to that failure. And you look at somebody like an Aragorn, the healing hands of a king. That
Faramir
to be a feminine trait.
Right. Yeah. Look at Faramir. I think this is one of the reasons why Éowyn and Faramir are just the perfect couple in many ways. Whereas Éowyn and Aragorn, it was just, no, it was never going to work really. But Faramir has a really well-developed feminine side.
Yeah.
He is not all about waving his sword around and, killing as many people as possible for the joy of it or anything like that. I mean, he says he does not love the sword for its sharpness, right? Because that's not what he is about. No. He is a scholar. He is a philosopher. He is thoughtful and sensitive. And these are all things that we could ascribe to his feminine side. Mm-hmm. He is perfectly capable of being a warrior.
Yeah.
And he will embrace that masculine side when it is necessary. Unlike Boromir, who searches for that. That is all Boromir wants, is to be that great warrior leading his people. And there are many ways in which you can say, well, poor old Boromir, he didn't have a hope in hell, really, did he? Because, born into the time in which he is, and his father, who is, so, yeah. But I think Tolkien, remember, said that he saw himself in Faramir the most. I think Tolkien was really quite interested in a more balanced personality. And that is what we're looking at when we're talking about masculinities and femininities, right? Because Éowyn is strong and courageous and determined and powerful in so many ways. It's society that decides, the society that she's living in, that decides that is not okay because she's in the physical body of a woman.
Right.
And hence Dernhelm expresses that masculinity for her.
Oh, we are going to have so much fun when we get to the steward and the king. As we lead up to that, I know we've already sort of touched on a few things, but can you give us a preview of some of the insights you're looking forward to sharing with us during that chapter, which will be coming out, I think, in March or April, folks? I can't remember off the top of my head.
Well, I'll give you one. And this is one that I actually spent quite a lot of time wrestling with over years. Okay. I've always admired Éowyn as a character. And it took me a long time to understand why she decides that she's going to give up being a warrior and get married.
Yeah.
And at first, my feminist side was like, what? No.
It is a bit of a jarring moment when she's like, I shall set this aside and I will become, and you're like, wait a minute.
Yeah, hang on. Really?
But I need to see what's going on.
Yeah. I'm going to argue very strongly that actually that is a powerful moment for Éowyn, where she takes control. For the first time, she gets the choice.
Yes.
And it's a very powerful moment, actually, for Éowyn. And I'm going to go into as much detail as Alan will allow me.
Which is a lot.
Depending on time.
We've got 3 episodes for what is a very short chapter, actually. So, yeah.
Oh, good, because I have things to say about that. I think, like I said, I had things to say about Yoreth. I have things to say about Éowyn in The Steward and the King, because I think it's very easy to dismiss what she does there as being, oh, well, she was a warrior, now she's just going to be a wife and mother. That's just Tolkien being, his dreadful self and reducing her. And actually, no. I'm going to argue the absolute opposite of that, and I'm looking forward to that.
Oh, I can't wait to that. That's going to be great fun. Now, on this next thing, I confess I know honestly next to nothing, other than that the books are definitely on my to-read list, which is growing longer by the day. But I understand you're teaching a space module on Discworld, the series by Sir Terry Pratchett. Tell us about the course, or courses plural, as I believe you've got another one lined up, and convince me, somebody who's not yet read the Discworld books, why I should join.
Oh, my goodness. Terry Pratchett should be on everybody's reading list. I have taught already. Back in December, I taught a class on all of the Witches books from the Discworld series.
Okay.
In the coming month, in January, I'm teaching a class on the Guards, the City Watch. So all of their books is 8 books. So we're whipping through those in 4 weeks.
8 books in a month.
Yes, but I'm assuming everybody who's joined the class has already read those books. They might have to skim back through to remind themselves of it, but it's definitely a class for those who've already read the books. And then I've got another class that I've proposed for space, which would be in March, and that will be on all the death books.
Okay.
So why should you read Terry Pratchett? Because there's no good reason not to. He's amazing. I love what Pratchett does with fantasy. He acknowledges his debt to Tolkien because he creates a secondary world that you can see where he's drawing from some of Tolkien's elements. And I like the fact that he was always very open about the fact that, he saw Tolkien as a great inspiration for how to create a secondary world properly. But what Pratchett does, which Tolkien wasn't doing quite in the same way, is that Pratchett takes modern day issues and he places them in a fantasy setting and then tells stories around those. So, for example, when we were talking about the Witches books last month, what we were doing then was we were reading them via some feminist criticism. So how is he presenting these witches? How is their power related to the power of the wizards in Discworld? What is the difference between them? And there are some really interesting female characters in the Witches books. And you can see that Pratchett is actually very aware of how to put forward a female character that is well-rounded, is interesting, has her own story to tell, has agency, is not just hanging off some dude's arm, isn't a secondary character just to stand in the background and look pretty. He actually centralizes these female characters. And they're not all good. Some of them are bad, and he avoids the thing that gives me a bit of the ick, which is this idea of the strong female character. Why must a good female character always be a strong female character? Why can't a interesting female character be weak or sad or evil or, all of the things that humans actually are? Why must they be strong to be interesting? And I think Pratchett avoids that trap, which I think is one of the things that I really like about him. With the City Watch books, there's quite a lot in there about colonialism and politics and rule and authority and all that sort of thing. But why this isn't dry as dust is because he's funny.
Yeah.
I mean, the humor on these pages, there are times I have read some of Pratchett's books and I have been crying laughing because his humor is just so on point.
Okay.
It's so funny. Now, you love yourself a pop culture reference.
I do.
You do. I've heard them. Okay, so many of them are British, but what you'll find peppered amongst his work are little tiny references here and there to things that are very rooted in British culture.
I might be able to catch a few of those. I mean,
I think you probably
I'm
would.
enough of an Anglophile. I've watched and listened and read enough. I think that I'll catch some of them, maybe. Okay.
Yes, I think you absolutely would.
Okay.
But it's so clever, but without being, I'm so clever.
Well, right? Yeah. You can't be clever and call attention to your cleverness. That's not how it works.
Exactly. And that's irritating. But Pratchett marries really good fantasy writing, excellent creation of a secondary world, humor, and edgy stuff,
Wow. Okay.
which is a technical term.
Edgy stuff?
Okay. Edgy stuff, yeah. And all of that is woven into every book.
Okay. Moving up my list. Moving up the queue.
I think you should move it up the queue. One mistake that some people make, and it's easy to make, and you can see why they do that, and it can put people off reading the Discworld books, is they start with the very first ones, which are The Colour of Magic and The Light Fantastic.
Okay.
Now, those are two very good books, but it's not where I would start with the Discworld. Absolutely not. Those are books that once you've read quite a few of the Discworld, go back and read them at that point. Because, I mean, there are a lot of these books. There's more than 30 books.
Okay. Wow.
And, he gets into his stride.
Yeah.
So one of the great things about reading through all of the Witches books in the chronological order in which they were published is that you can see from the first of the Witches books to the last of the Witches books, and of course there were many in between that weren't about the witches, you can see how he has a greater understanding of his characters, how he knows them so much better. He knows his world so much better. So I would highly recommend, if anybody's interested in reading Pratchett and hasn't read Pratchett before, go on the internet and look for the reading lists that people make. Because this is what I've done with these Pratchett courses for Space, is I've put them into these groups, like a lot of people have done. So the Witches books, the Wizards books, the Death books, the City Watch books. There's lots of different ones that you can create these groups of. And I just think that's a better way to read them. So,
I hear that, because I have a recommended reading order for the Foundation books, a science fiction series from Asimov that I love so much, that isn't necessarily what people might lean towards. So I hear you. I'll have to Google that, look that up, and maybe get a confirmation from you. But in the meantime, Sara, thank you for joining me here on the TTT today. Your episodes with me on the Prancing Pony podcast last year were a highlight for many of our listeners and for me. And I know that we are all looking forward to having you join me again this season. So thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. And I'm really looking forward to it myself. Thanks, Alan.
Oh, very much so. Folks, that is it for today's Fandom Friday. But come back next time for another Fandom Friday to meet yet another of your fellow Tolkien fans and maybe learn what niches of the community you might be interested in exploring. And if you're interested in joining me here for a future Fandom Friday, let me know by emailing bartleman@theprancingponypodcast.com. Please visit patreon.com/TolkienTimes to learn how you can support the show, get an ad-free feed, join me on my content council, listen to a bonus weekly episode, and a whole lot more. Join me again tomorrow on today's Tolkien Times as we wrap up this week with Silmarillion Saturday. Now, if you're watching this on YouTube, please be sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Please follow or subscribe in your podcast apps, and follow @Tolkien Times on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. Finally, as Faramir says, go with the goodwill of all good men.